Hello and welcome back to the Jet Press Podcast. My name is Justin Freed. It feels good to be back, and I'm joined as always by my man Mike Luciano. Mike, how you doing, man? What's going on? It's been a while.
Well, I'm feeling good now that the dynamic duo is back. Justin is back from his darkness retreat, or I guess it's more of a lightness retreat because he was down getting some sunshine. So now that he is back, which thank you to Scott Mason, the Play Like a Jet podcast, who fought through some technical troubles, but he definitely, I thought, put on a good show. So thanks for having Scott on. Thanks for filling in for Justin. But Justin is back. So if you want to listen to Justin and me, you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube at The Jet Press. Make sure you subscribe and make sure you hit that little bell so you can get notified when we go live. Plus, check out all of our great YouTube shorts. Check out our interviews with Carter Warren, Jark Bernard Converse, who are going to be on the New York Jets in 2023. Without further ado, let's get into what's a pretty full show for kind of that May-June doldrums. The schedule release. While we've known about it for a little bit, this is kind of the new reality for Jets fans. Is there's no more 1 o'clock games on Sunday 14 times a year. There are primetime games, marquee opponents, and I mean the league really wants to get the Jets visible because they have quite the gauntlet that they got to run in the first 6 weeks of the season before the bye. I mean, you can make a case they have to play like the 3 best teams in the league within the first. I don't know if I necessarily believe it. You could easily make that case. So they start off on Monday Night Football, the Monday night opener at home. Aaron Rodgers' first game. That stadium's going to be crazy against the Buffalo Bills. Probably gets a little bit easier, right? No way. Gets harder because they got to go to Dallas, who, for all their faults, still a really deep team. And then they go New England at home. All right, I know New England is not what they once were, but I mean, we both know that some sort of unusual goings on is going to happen in that game. It's the Patriots. It just happens no matter what you do. Then Kansas City, Sunday Night Football. That's going to be a barn burner. At Denver. I know they struggled last year, but Russell Wilson, Sean Payton, that defense on the road and that altitude, that's a game you got to worry about. Then the friggin' Eagles. I still believe the Jets haven't ever beat the Eagles. Is that still true?
Yep, that's the only team they've never beaten.
And then they got the bye and then a road kind of home game against the Giants to kick off the second half. Now, it gets easier, obviously, in the second half of the year. Like, there's a stretch where starting with the home game against Miami, who's still a tough team regardless, the Black Friday game. Then it's Atlanta, Houston, Miami again, Washington, Cleveland. So at least at the end of the year, it kind of eases up. But man, those first few games, we're really going to find out just how good this Jets team is.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think I feel like I missed the initial wave of like schedule discussion because I was away when it came out. But I remember literally being on vacation, and I was curious. I was kind of trying to stay away from work, but I was curious. So I checked out the schedule, and I was like, man, those first 6 games are brutal. Like, they are brutal. And I know the Jets have Aaron Rodgers right now. The Jets expect to be Super Bowl contenders. They expect to be one of the best teams in the NFL. So in theory, no game should be looked at as, oh, the Jets are going to lose this game. But realistically, we're talking about the Jets being underdogs in 4 of those first 6 games. Realistically, I think the only games where they'll go in right now, and we obviously stuff can change. But right now, I'd say they'd be favored probably against New England because that's at home. I know the Jets they haven't beaten the Patriots in 8 years. Like, that's still. We should not be looking at any Patriots game as like, oh, the Jets are going to win that game, right? I think they'll still be favored at home, depending on what happens in those first 2 games. But it's obviously not an easy game by any stretch. And then they'll likely be favored maybe on the road against Denver. I know on the road against Denver is tough, and the Broncos should be better this year. But I think on paper, the Jets are a better team. But I don't foresee a scenario where the Jets are favored in any of those other 4 games: at home against Buffalo, on the road against Dallas, at home against Kansas City, and at home against Philadelphia. That's a gauntlet. Like that, you are going to find out just how good this team is. If the Jets go 2-4, 3-3, at least look competitive, and maybe they lose like a tough game to the Chiefs, tough game to the Eagles, and maybe throwing in a loss to the Bills. If they go 3-3 during those first 6 games, I think that's encouraging. That's crazy to say for a team that we're hoping wins 11 games this year, but it's just how it is. Like, that's just the way it is. It's also, like you said, it's going to be weird. And as someone who unfortunately kind of does this for a living too, I like 1 o'clock games. I like having the day done earlier. The Jets have 2 1 o'clock games before the month of December. That's
Ooh.
ridiculous. They have the, let me see. I was just looking at it. They have the 1:00 game against New England and then the 1:00 game against the Giants. They don't play another 1:00 game until December 3rd against the Falcons.
Oh, God. I hope it's
And then
not
they
like
got,
last year's Broncos where we had to watch them score 15, 16 points every single week in prime time.
yeah, well, the NFL's definitely hoping the Jets are not this year's Broncos, and they're hoping Aaron Rodgers is not this year's Russell Wilson, as the Jets are as well.
I mean,
But
they only traded for a veteran quarterback and have Nathaniel Hackett calling plays. Surely that won't happen.
That's it. That's where the similarities end, and they have Billy Turner. But that's it. That's where the similarities end. But yeah, it's obviously we knew who the Jets were going to play. We already knew the caliber of opponents that were on the schedule. It wasn't going to be an easy schedule, regardless of how it shaped out. But it is very interesting to see the tough schedule, that tough gauntlet in the beginning of the year. It is also nice to have that bye week come right after those really tough 6 games, because it kind of just gives the Jets a little chance to reset. And then they have that road game against the Giants, which isn't really a road game. So, the Jets, I know they lucked out as well in terms of net rest differential. I know people are like, oh, the Jets are the NFL's darling or whatever. They've been screwed over with that net rest differential a lot in the last few years. So it's nice to have it on the Jets side for once. But yeah, I'm not a big schedule guy. Like I'm not super upset that I kind of miss schedule release, because schedule stuff, like schedule content, is whatever to me. Like I'll talk about it and it's fun to talk about sometimes, but ultimately we knew who the Jets are going to play anyway. And I don't think there's a ton to actually break down, but the first 6 games is going to be interesting.
I still do think that at its core right now, looking at the schedule, the Jets are an 11-3 team. And I don't really want to go down.
11, you said 11-3? What?
11-6. Yeah, I know how to count. I thought it was 1974 where they played.
What's going on here?
Games for a second. They're going to cancel the last 3. But because I remember looking at this schedule, and I think 3-3 is kind of appropriate. Maybe because I think the only things I could probably pencil in for a loss is, even though they're at home, I don't think they beat Kansas City. I think you're 0-1, and even though they're at home, I know that the Eagles are not going to be 18-0 or 17-0. However many freaking games you play in a season, they're not going to be 17-0.
17. It's 17 now.
But some team's going to beat them. If you want to say, road team, Aaron Rodgers, like I would not be completely stunned if that happened, but I'm not going to assume that it happened. So that's probably going to be 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think they probably are going to beat Buffalo on Monday night starting out.
Wow.
Could
you imagine the scenes at MetLife on September 11th? Obviously, all the history there with the Jets, with New York, with Robert Saleh. Of course, he has history with that date. Just the scenes at MetLife. If the Jets host the Bills, beat them in Aaron Rodgers' first game. Oh my God, dude! Like
Zach Wilson beat him at home.
He did. He absolutely did. That's like, and I'm not looking at any game, even the Chiefs game. I'm not looking at that as like, oh, I think the Jets are going to lose that game. The Jets totally could win that game. Even aside from the whole like any given Sunday trope, right? The Jets can compete with the Chiefs, or at least you're going into this year with the expectation that they can. So I'm not looking at any of these games as like, oh, they're definitely, going to lose this, or they're likely going to lose it. I think they totally can. But obviously we got to be realistic here and see that there's some really tough games, especially early in the year.
They did set it up for maximum annoyance, though, because once the Jets get through this tough early part of the schedule, and after the bye's not even that much better, because it's the Giants who won a playoff game last year, and then the Chargers, Justin Herbert and all those guys. That stretch at the end of the year, like the winnable games, oh my goodness, because they're going to already have a couple of losses stacked up. Every single bad play, every single turnover is going to feel like a gunshot right in your chest.
Yeah.
Like if they don't beat like Washington or Atlanta or Houston in that stretch, I mean, it's going to feel like 3 losses.
They're going
really going to hurt.
There's a very realistic chance the Jets go into week 18 with, a must-win game to make the playoffs. Very realistic.
And it's at New England.
And it's on the road in New England. Do you know, and this is going to be sort of like a cheating thing here. Do you know when the last time the Jets not just beat the Patriots on the road? Because the last time they beat the Patriots on the road was the playoffs. Do you know the last time they beat them on the road in the regular season? And I believe the caveat is also, the last time they beat them on the road in the regular season.
On the road in the regular season. I'm going to go 2008, like Matt Castle.
Yes, it is 2008. And if you want to throw in one last caveat, that was in overtime. So the last time the Jets have beaten the Patriots on the road in the regular season in regulation was 2006. So we're talking 17 years ago. Now, obviously,
I was 9.
Yeah, that's a lot of caveats there, of course. But that's kind of what we're talking about. If the Jets are going into Foxborough on, in week 18, the last game of the year, needing a win to make the playoffs. that's the kind of history that they're going to have to make. So none of those games are easy. I know that, we're talking about the second half is easier. It definitely is. But they're, like you said, they're going to be must-win games. Like, you have to beat Atlanta at home. You have to beat Houston at home. You have to beat Washington at home. Like, those are the games that Jets are going to have to win probably later in the year. They're probably going to have to beat the Browns on the road, which, they did that this past year in miraculous fashion. Hopefully they could do it again.
They needed a miracle to do it.
They did. So it'll be interesting. I'm definitely excited for, the layout of the schedule. It's going to be a brutal start, but we'll learn very quickly how competitive this Jets team is going to be.
And now let's move on to something that's, I think, a little more stressful for Jets fans, because Jets fans already knew the opponents. It was just a matter of mixing and matching the order. So that's what took the stress out of it for me. Now, something that is stressful is the Quinnen Williams thing. And I may need to perjure myself a little bit, because I was kind of blasé about it in the past, because I'm just assuming, like, oh, when they play Quinnen Williams, then this will happen. There's no way they won't pay Quinnen Williams. I still think they'll pay Quinnen Williams. But, man, now he's doing, this is what the kids do nowadays, man. Not to sound like a grumpy old fart, but, I mean, when they want leverage and they really want to turn up the heat, they delete all the references on social media. Quinnen Williams has now taken New York Jets out of his bio on Instagram, and he did that while retweeting Dexter Lawrence's contract with the Giants, who Quinnen Williams is a better player than Dexter Lawrence. They're both very good, but Quinnen's better. Saying, without saying it officially, pay me. What's going on? And we've kind of outlined, both last week I did, and then me and Justin before that, the parameters of what a contract's going to look like. And in terms of average annual value, the number 2 defensive tackle right now is Jeffrey Simmons at $23.5 million. Deron Payne then follows at $22.5 million, and then Dexter Lawrence at $21.5 million. Javon Hargrave got 21 flat for his 4-year deal with the Niners. So Quinnen, I think at this point, is saying, pay me more than Dexter Lawrence, and I think he's hinting pay me more than Jeffrey Simmons, which would make him the biggest or highest paid non-Aaron Donald defensive tackle in the league. And we can just rehash all the points that we've said about how he's the perfect scheme fit for this defense, and he's dominant, and he's ascending, and he shows that the Jets actually have a somewhat respectable internal development system, because he was not this good when he got drafted, and now he's a dominant player. The main reason, though, is like this stuff reverberates through the locker room. Like, players know what's going on, and they're saying they won't pay Quinnen after that year. What's going on? And I know that Joe Douglas probably privately is saying, like, look, let's just get this Aaron Rodgers contract restructure done. Let's figure out maybe if we need to get rid of Corey Davis or Carl Lawson for cap space reasons, and then we'll get back to you. But you can only do that for so long, man. I mean, that didn't stop the Giants. That didn't stop the Titans. That didn't stop the Commanders. And if it's stopping the Jets, I think that's a bad look for Joe Douglas.
It is. And especially you have to consider history here, too. Like, the Jets have not re-signed a first-round pick since Muhammad Wilkerson. That was the last first-round pick that they gave an extension to. He was drafted in 2011, I think. Yeah, 2011. That's how long it was until, like, the last time the Jets would sign a first-round pick. So you have the history there. And also, it's not like they haven't had first-round picks worthy of being extended. Now, obviously, there's other factors in play here, right? Jamal Adams, great player. There's a reason he wasn't extended. Leonard Williams, very good player. There's a reason he wasn't extended. But still, when you look at that history and you look at how, the Jets have kind of handled some of their internal superstars, it's fair to be concerned. And I don't blame Quinnen Williams for being upset at the lack of progress here, especially when you have, Joe Douglas go out to, telling the media is like he's optimistic about the state of the situation of contract negotiations and extension talks. I don't think Quinnen Williams is optimistic right now. I don't think he feels the same way. I don't think Nicole Lynn, Quinnen Williams' agent, feels the same way. It seems as though they're pretty frustrated with the lack of progress being made here, especially since this was supposed to be a priority for the Jets this offseason. That's kind of what they've told reporters. That's what they've told the media. That's what has been internally leaked, that Quinnen Williams was a priority for the team, this organization. It is not like those words have not come to fruition. Clearly, they've put this on the back burner. And obviously, like you mentioned, this is, this stuff resonates with the locker room. Like we've seen a number of players from Breece Hall to Mekhi Becton to John Franklin Myers. Pretty sure DJ Reed has tweeted it out. The extend Q, extend Quinnen Williams. Like these guys want him to get paid. As soon as they restructured John Franklin Myers' contract, the first thing I think it was on Instagram, the first thing he put out was extend Q. Right? He restructured his deal and was like, great, we now have more money. We now have more cap space so that we can extend Quinnen Williams. These guys want to see Quinnen Williams paid. He's a leader, even if he's not an outspoken leader. He's a leader in that locker room, and everyone knows just how damn good he is and how important he is to this team. So dragging it out like they're doing does no one favors. It also doesn't help because his price will continue to go up. The other part of it is that Chris Jones of the Chiefs is also looking for a new deal, and he wants to become the second highest paid defensive tackle in football. Quinnen Williams is going to become the second highest paid defensive tackle in football. That's what he wants. That's what he should get. He's going to surpass Jeffrey Simmons' contract. He's going to surpass Deron Payne's guaranteed money. He's going to be the second highest paid defensive tackle in football behind Aaron Donald, and he absolutely deserves that. But if Chris Jones gets paid, now Quinnen Williams, what his value is goes up. Like that goes significantly up because say Chris Jones comes in with a deal where he's making 25, 26 million over 3 years, averaged over 3 years. Then what do you do? Like, then what does Quinnen Williams make? Well, now you're probably talking 26, 27 for Quinnen Williams because he's still going to want to be the second highest paid defensive tackle in football. So it does them no favors by waiting. It does Quinnen Williams obviously no favors. It's not helping the locker room chemistry because clearly guys, even if they're not furious about it, they're annoyed. And I don't blame them for being annoyed about it. You can use the Rodgers excuse. You could say, that they're trying to work that out. They need to get this done. In terms of a panic meter, right? Like how concerned we should be, I'm still very confident a deal gets done. I'm not at the stage where I'm like, they should entertain trade offers for Quinnen Williams. I don't think we get to that point. I will be concerned if it's July, if it's training camp and we still don't have a contract. That's, I think, when I'll be concerned. But right now, we still got a month until mandatory minicamp. That's kind of when, like, Quinnen Williams, if he's holding out mandatory minicamp, the Jets can theoretically fine him. I don't know if they would, but they can. And if it's, mid-June and he's still holding out, maybe the Jets would go that route. I don't think they would. And then if we get to training camp and he still doesn't have a deal, then I think it's fair to be genuinely concerned about the situation. But as long as it happens before then, this is just a lot of annoyance, a lot of nonsense for nothing. But I sense the frustration from Quinnen Williams, and I sense the frustration from Jets fans, and I don't blame them.
Imagine what would happen in a locker room if a defensive coach who likely was brought in because he said, this is my plan to make Quinnen Williams a star. I guarantee you that is part of why Saleh got the Jets job, was he said, I got this perfect, foolproof plan to make sure that Quinnen Williams works out. And then you do not pay him a contract. Not only would that just in the short term hurt a championship team that wants and needs him badly, but also think about are they going to do this again with Sauce Gardner? Are they going to do this again with Breece Hall? Are they going to do this again with Garrett Wilson? Like, the young guys got to be freaking out. Because Quinnen, as much as we love those guys, that's 1 year of production. We've now seen, I think last year, 2021, Quinnen was well above average, I think I would put it.
For sure.
He was not elite, but definitely I would say maybe a top 10 defensive tackle or close to it. And then this year Aaron Donald kind of has that title emeritus until he retires. But in terms of performance, Quinnen was up there with anybody last year. And you're just going to, let it not pay him and then flip him to the Bears for like a second round pick? Like, what kind of GMing is that? That's part of being an executive. It's not just Joe Douglas finding some big hog molly on the offensive line because that's his thing. Like, navigating your relationships with players and extending your players and keeping the vibes up, like, that's a part of it. It's a huge part of it. And Joe Douglas is going to flunk that part of his examination horribly if this goes, as you said, to like mandatory minicamp, because that's when shit's going to hit the fan. And if Quinnen Williams wants to stick, they could fine him, and I know the new CBA basically makes it harder for guys to hold out, and they make it's more punitive if you do that now. I don't think it'll get to that point, but he has a position where he could do that, and then what happens? They're screwed. What do you do? Play Solomon Thomas every single time? They're going to give him 160 yards a game rushing every single time if that's the plan. Well, they're going to move Franklin Myers inside the whole time and really let Will McDonald kick it on the outside? Like, why are they operating like this? This is not this. I thought Aaron Rodgers was the end of same old Jets. I don't think this is same old Jets yet, but there's signs of same old Jets. This is certainly, we've seen same old Jets do this a lot with the few guys they had that deserve to be paid. Like, just clear the schedule, get him and Nicole Lynn in a room and go, look, let's just get this out. I'll pay for the coffee. I'll get food in. Just, we're not leaving this room until we have a tentative agreement. That's what I would do if I'm Joe Douglas. What else you got going on right now, Joe?
I think ultimately it's going to get done, and we're going to look back and be like, okay, I'm glad it got done. I wish we didn't have to go through all this nonsense, but I'm glad it got done. Yeah, it's annoying. Like that's kind of what it just comes down to. I think it's an annoying thing that the Jets are kind of dragging us out the way that they are. You touched on it before. You need to build up trust with your players. Like that's kind of what it comes down to. The Jets as an organization have not really built up that credibility that they pay their players. Like they're not seen as a team that takes care of their own, for what if, for better or worse. A lot of that is due to the fact that they really haven't had a ton of star players to retain. Like it's not like they're like the Baltimore Ravens or the Philadelphia Eagles, where they've just drafted and developed a ton of stars and they can just keep paying them. Like it's not like that. But the guys that the Jets have had, for whatever reason, they haven't necessarily paid. I mean, they've gotten, someone like John Franklin Myers, they paid. Like, it's not like they haven't extended anybody. But Leonard Williams, he was traded away. Jamal Adams was traded away. So when you don't have that reputation, it makes these contract negotiations, it kind of puts them under a microscope. And you're like, okay, how are you going to handle this situation? And what sucks is that, like, you have the market already set and you have the precedent already set. The Titans already paid Jeffrey Simmons. There was like a little bit of time where they were like, Simmons was clearly not happy about how the negotiations were going, but they worked that out. They paid him. The Commanders paid Deron Payne. The Giants paid Dexter Lawrence for what I think is actually a very good deal. I think the Giants got Dexter Lawrence on a very, very good deal, because I believe he's a better player than Deron Payne and he's making less than Payne.
Yes.
And so you got, you have other young defensive tackles other than Christian Wilkins. Every other young defensive tackle has gotten paid this offseason, right? So you have the market set. You have other teams paying their own and taking care of their own. The Jets just haven't done it yet. I think they'll do it, or I'm confident they'll do it. I'm very confident that it'll happen. I'm still confident that's going to happen this offseason. I'm still confident it's going to happen before July, but it's just not a great precedent to set that you're kind of dragging it out and you're putting it on the back burner. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's an optics thing. They've made it very clear that Quinnen Williams is not their priority right now. And I think that that's silly. And I think that Quinnen Williams is right to be annoyed about that. Because
what is the priority? All right, Rodgers. All right.
Yeah.
Other than that, you can't do two things at once?
I agree.
Like, what's number two? What's number two if not this?
I agree. Quinnen Williams should have been a priority since February, like since January. They should have worked that out before they even probably got a quarterback trade. Because if you work that Quinnen Williams trade out, or the extension out, then the other extensions, they would have happened after Quinnen Williams. You're probably paying Quinnen Williams less than what you're going to eventually pay him. That price tag just continues and continues to go up. So again, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're not doing Quinnen Williams any favors. You're not doing that locker room chemistry any favors by waiting. So I'm still confident it'll get done. I think it'll be roughly around $25 million a year, probably 4 years. So we're looking at like $100 million in total, richest contract in Jets history, which is fair. And then probably like $55-60 million guaranteed. I think that's probably what it's going to end up being. I don't, know if it'll be closer like 26, 27. If Chris Jones gets extended before Quinnen, then yeah, we're probably talking maybe 26, 27, maybe even more. So again, hopefully it happens soon. But I'm still confident it'll happen. It's just annoying.
How much of this is it? All right, not to be vulgar, a lower extremities swinging contest between Joe Douglas and this agent? Because Joe Douglas, for whatever reason, I guess this is a good way to operate as a general manager. Is he's big on, this is what I think a player's worth, and if you don't like it, go pound sand because I'm not overpaying for it. I'll find an upgrade elsewhere. And if I'm going to be honest, outside, like he drafted well in 2022, and I like some of the 2023 picks he made, but I mean, that philosophy has not helped him build a team with a winning record yet. Like, sometimes you got to bend a little bit. Sometimes, you know what? Give Quinnen an extra $1.5 million a year average annual value. Like, if it stops this, isn't it better than this headache and all these consternations and seeing all these articles from Lions fans who want to trade from Quinnen Williams? Like, don't you just want to put a stop to this?
And I think he will. I honestly, I don't even think right now that the dollar figures are a huge holdup. I think it's just the Jets not prioritizing it. I think they don't see this as they're not in any rush. They don't see this as a priority. They're not trying to get this done immediately. Because
if it was close, wouldn't they have just done it?
Well, they're essentially like they're basically pushing back negotiations. That's the vibe that I'm getting right now. They're like, we will get to this. We'll get to this. We'll get to this. I'm sure, that like they're not agreeing on the same number right now. But if they wanted to, if they sat down and said, this is our priority, I am very confident they could work something out within a week. Very confident. I just don't think that they're trying to do that right now. I don't think that's their priority. And I'll say this. Joe Douglas, I agree with you to some extent for sure. I think there's definitely a fine line between being a Mike McCagnon and just throwing around money and just being reckless with how you value players.
Jermaine Johnson, 5 years. Here you go.
Resetting the linebacker mark with CJ Mosley, like Le'Veon Bell. Like there's so many instances of him just ridiculously overpaying. I think Joe Douglas is willing to do that for certain situations. I'll use like the Elijah Vera Tucker trade up, for example. He paid above value to trade up for Elijah Vera Tucker. Like they gave up a lot to move up there. And it was a lot of money to move up for a position, you know, as Seth Walder would say. Like that's why he's so anti that
that
trade.
Bring that name up on this podcast.
Yeah, because he and other people that are like, you know, super into like exact analytics of draft picks and they were against that trade because Joe Douglas did pay above value to move up for a non-premium position. So I think there is precedent of him doing that, of him giving the extra length, you know, to try and get a player because he believes in their talent. And I'm pretty sure he will do that with Quinnen Williams. I don't think he's going to be like, I'm giving you 24 million and that's it. And I'm not going to give you 25 or 26. I don't think that that's going to eventually be the holdup. I think it's just the Jets don't see it as a priority. They don't see it as a rush. They know they have him under team control this year. They know they have him under team control theoretically for another 2 years if they want. And as much as I don't love that philosophy and I don't love that approach with your players, that's kind of how they see it. And I think that that's really the holdup.
Now, on to a player who could still be impactful, but I think less so than Quinnen Williams, obviously. Kwon Alexander, a guy who emerged as a viable backup linebacker spot starter, which is kind of what he is at this point in his career. We all know he had his heyday under Robert Saleh with the 49ers. Kind of bounced around. I believe he was with New Orleans for a little bit. He's a Louisiana guy, went to LSU. But at this point in his career, what he is a fine, average linebacker who can make some run stops. He's athletic enough to hold his own in coverage. He's pretty much, I think, the most average player in the league, the most average linebacker in the league. Like, not really a standout, but you know what? It's hard to find many guys in terms of just pure depth who are better than a guy like Kwon Alexander. So I don't want to like ride for this guy to the point that he's, you know, every Jets tweet, it's we'll re-sign Kwon Alexander. Like, grand scheme of things, Kwon Alexander not going to impact a single game in terms of win or loss, unless he does something profoundly stupid, in which case he could impact the loss, but I don't want to put that on him yet.
I mean, look, it's May 17th, you know, there's not a lot to rally behind at this stage, you know.
Well, the Jets' plans to sign Kwon Alexander took a little bit of a hit because Kwon Alexander visited with the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that, I mean, I don't want to pretend like I'm the expert on Steelers defensive schemes. I do know some of their stuff, just looking at how some of the players they drafted, like Joey Porter, fit in. It seems somewhat similar to Robert Saleh. Obviously, Brian Flores leaving changes the calculus a little bit, but it seems like a team that could win and could make the playoffs. I know it sounds ridiculous, but every year we say the Steelers are going to fall apart, and then they almost make the playoffs every year. Mike Tomlin still has never had a losing season, I believe, as a coach. So that's a legitimate competitor for the Jets. They can't. This is not just him going to a team that's tanking for the number one pick to get one last big payday. This is a legitimate team that could steal him away. And I think right now momentum might be trending towards him signing with the Steelers. And the Jets are at their top deputy linebacker for an aging CJ Mosley, who if he gets banged up, things could really go off the rails. I'll put this to you, Justin, though. If Kwon Alexander leaves, because I think it's kind of trending towards him maybe getting that Steelers thing, or even just for the sake of argument, let's say he does get the Steelers gig and he ends up in Pittsburgh. Do you think a guy like maybe Jamien Sherwood or Hamza Nasruddin, probably Sherwood, I think above Hamza, is ready to step in and be that backup linebacker?
I think he would have to be. Like, I don't know if I would. That is not the route that I would want to take with this Jets defense. I would definitely want to bring in a Kwon Alexander, even if it's not Kwon, maybe another veteran like a Miles Jack or someone, at least just have that veteran presence in there. But I think the Jets are much more likely to just roll with the young guys on their roster. And that sucks because I like Jamien Sherwood. I think in the limited snaps that he's had on defense, he's actually impressed and he's played well. I think the Jets have kind of been grooming him to potentially be that Mike replacement for CJ Mosley maybe in the future. I mean, obviously time's running out at this point on his rookie contract. He's only going to have a couple of years left. But I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him take on a larger role. I just think that it would make a lot more sense for this team to bring in another veteran. And Kwon Alexander is definitely the best candidate for that. Obviously, he was here last year. I don't think this is a hot take. I think he was the second best linebacker in the Jets last year. I think he's better than Quincy Williams. He's more consistent than Quincy Williams. And so obviously Quincy Williams is going to be one of your nickel linebackers. Him and CJ Mosley have those jobs on lock. You know, maybe you'll see guys like Chuck Clark or Jordan Whitehead play that role a little bit. And I think that is an underlooked part of this, that maybe one of them could potentially fill in at linebacker if need be. But I definitely would love to bring back Kwon Alexander, because I just think he played 49% of snaps last year. He played a bigger role than people realize. Like, he was out there for
12 games.
Right, exactly. And that was that's the whole reason the Jets were able to get him for as cheap as he was at that point, because they signed him in August, like the beginning of August last year. They signed him as basically a veteran minimum contract. But it's because he'd played more than 12 games once in 7 years. Right? Like, he was obviously the guy is always injured. And he played a full 17 game schedule last year, which was very surprising. The entire Jets defense was super healthy, and it was true for Kwon Alexander as well. So I think, like you said, he's an average starter at this stage. I think he's a fine third linebacker. He definitely fits their scheme. Obviously, even before he came to the Jets, he had experience with Robert Saleh dating back to their days in San Francisco. So he's played in the scheme a lot. I think he's a good player, and I'd very much like the Jets to bring him back. I'm hoping this is like an Al Woods thing where, Al Woods visited with the Browns, didn't end up signing with them, and then eventually signed with the Jets. So I'm hoping this is like that, where, Kwon Alexander had his visit with the Steelers. As of right now, obviously it's Wednesday, and you know how these shows end up going for us. Kwon Alexander's probably going to sign with the Steelers immediately after we end the show. But as of what we know right now, he hasn't signed with anybody. He's still a free agent. And I don't want to say anything that's going to make this, like an old take exposed, right? But I don't know if he's going to sign with them. Like, we haven't heard anything. And generally, if somebody is signing with a team after a visit, they sign the next day or something. It's been a few days since that visit now. So hopefully that's good news for the Jets. Hopefully he ends up taking that visit with the Jets. And maybe that's the old take exposed. Maybe he ends up signing with the Jets like tomorrow or something. That'd be great. But I definitely would love to bring him back rather than relying on the young guys like Jamien Sherwood, Hamza Nasruddin. I know they drafted Zaire Barnes. They have Chaz Surratt. Like, they got a few young guys there. I think Sherwood would be the most likely candidate. But I would definitely like to bring in Kwon, or even another veteran.
The weird thing about Kwon, or the Jets linebackers just specifically, like in a macro way to observe them, is I think looking at their depth chart, I know Quincy Williams got that contract. If his last name was Quincy Jones, I don't think he gets that contract.
Isn't Quincy Jones like a musician?
You know what? I think he might be.
I think he's a record producer, right? Yeah. Look at that.
You're right. All right. So, all right.
And he's the father of Rashida Jones. I'm sorry. Okay, never mind.
Wow. Okay. So, maybe you do pay up for a guy with that celebrity status. But fine. No, Quincy Smith could be if his last name wasn't Quincy Williams.
I don't think
brother
Quincy
wasn't
Jones
Quinnen Williams.
Linebacker anyway, so don't worry.
Then I don't think he gets that contract, and not in a pure nepotism way, because I think he's proven he can hang on an NFL roster and be an effective player. I think committing to them in the way that they did kind of made it look like, oh, don't worry, Quinnen, we got your brother locked up, kind of thing. And at a contract that is probably a little bit above market value, because we're looking out for you, Quinnen, wink, wink. By the way, sign that contract. So I think if they let Quincy leave in the offseason and they paid Kwon that same contract to be the starting linebacker, I don't know if I'd have a huge problem with it.
I wouldn't.
I think Kwon, honestly, is a better player than Quincy Williams. Now, the problem then becomes I don't think the Jets view him that way.
They don't. They definitely.
I don't think either Quincy Williams or Kwon Alexander is going to make or break just the defensive scheme or just how the Jets operate. But the fact that they had a player who is familiar with the coaching staff, is clearly a scheme fit, addresses a position of need, and it seems like everybody likes. Like, he's a good dude. He plays hard. It seems weird that they would be very hands-off and so committed to Quincy Williams, just purely from a schematic and how they play standpoint.
Mm-hmm. The Jets evaluate their linebackers differently than I think a lot of fans and analysts do. And honestly, differently than a lot of other teams. They really, really prioritize athleticism and really prioritize upside and flashiness more so than consistency. They're okay with the occasional mental lapses. They're okay even with the missed tackles, more so than I think other teams would be. And it's part of it is, due to the scheme that they run. And I think a lot of it is just also Robert Saleh's philosophy with linebackers. Of course, he had Fred Warner in San Francisco. Fred Warner, the best linebacker in football. I don't think that's a debate. I don't think
by a mile.
I don't think there's anybody in his tier. They don't have a Fred Warner, obviously, in this team. But even someone like CJ Mosley, he'll have his occasional lapses, not necessarily mental lapses, but he misses his share of tackles. So does Quincy Williams. So did Kwon Alexander. They prioritize guys like that. And so for that reason, honestly, even if they didn't bring back Kwon, I could totally see them going out and getting someone like Myles Jack, who I believe he crossed over with Saleh in Jacksonville, right? He had to have.
I think maybe early in his career, or was he in San Francisco by then?
I'm going to double check that. So he was drafted in 2016. Saleh was in
I think that
Jacksonville.
might have been the last year. I think 2017
Yeah.
was
Okay.
Shanahan's.
So he
Yeah.
crossed over 1 year in Jacksonville, where Saleh was the linebackers coach. So he does have history with Miles Jack. Another guy out there is like Deion Jones, who we're talking about similar players here, right? They're big names. They're former stars and studs at their position who are definitely well past their prime. They're not even old, but they've not aged super well. They're
God,
still
Deion Jones, that was so sudden. I mean, there were not like best linebacker in the league, but people were like, "Oh, is Deion Jones like a consistent Pro Bowler?" And then I don't even know what happened. I don't think did he get hurt? I
I
don't
don't
think
even
he
know.
did.
I think he did have an injury, but I a lot of times we've seen this so much, and I think we've talked about this on the show as well. How many off-ball linebacker contracts have just aged so poorly? And Kwon Alexander's another one. Like he's another example of that, of just guys who were Pro Bowlers early in their career. They peaked very early. It's almost like running backs. Like that's kind of what the off-ball linebacker position has become. It's almost like running backs, where you have them early in their career, and then you don't really want to sign them to that big second contract, because then you get guys like Zach Cunningham, like Miles Jack, like Deion Jones, like Kwon Alexander. There's so many examples.
And it's so weird that this free agency, like how many big money, like Tremaine Edmonds getting that big 5-year deal, TJ Edward, like it was the year of paying linebackers.
I know. I'm very interested to see how the Tremaine Edmonds contract goes, because if history repeats itself, like if he's following the trends of recent history, it's not going to age well. It's not. I guess Roquan Smith is kind of breaking the trend a little bit because he was really good with the Ravens last year. He got paid. The Ravens paid him, right? Or did
$100
they
million.
Yeah, they paid him.
But again, Roquan Smith, I think, is better than all the people we just
Right.
listed.
He was really good with the Ravens after he was traded to them. But a lot of those off-ball linebacker contracts aged so poorly. So I don't know. We're kind of going off on a tangent here. But I think that, Miles Jack definitely fits what they'd be looking for in that third, in that Sam linebacker. At least probably more of a Will, I think. But he could play that Sam role, I'm sure. And obviously he has experience with Saleh. If they do miss out on Kwon, I would much rather bring in someone like Miles Jack, even if you're still saying, hey, he's going to compete with Jamie and Sherwood and Hamza Najmuddin in camp, or even Chaz Surratt, or even Zaire Barnes, whoever, right? If you're saying we're going to have a big open competition, that's cool. Just bring in somebody who has a little bit more experience, and also just get a little more depth, because they're thin at linebacker. They signed out of their undrafted free agents, which we'll talk about momentarily. They brought in, I think, 3 or 4 linebackers because they're just so thin. They just didn't know how to have the numbers. And so I would love to bring in a veteran, just one, for the extra depth, and 2, to have that extra veteran insurance. And, if Quincy Williams goes down, now you're not starting Hamza Najmuddin and Jamie and Sherwood at linebacker, because that's not good.
Let's flip the script. Let's go offense this time. Let's go talk about Breece Hall, because Breece Hall, as we all know, recovering from his ACL injury, and they've really been handling it carefully, almost like when, sometimes when baseball pitchers get Tommy John, sometimes guys are back in 7 months, sometimes guys are at a year, and then usually with a younger guy, like I can't remember, just recently, I think Kumar Rocker, who's a top prospect for the Rangers, got Tommy John, and they're talking about him not pitching again for maybe like a year and a half or 2 years, because you're just that extra cautious with a younger guy. I think that's how the Jets are kind of operating with Breece Hall. Like Joe Douglas the other day said, it's a possibility that Breece Hall plays week 1. And for a lot of Jets fans were going, all right, that's good. Like he's working good in his recovery. Let's go Breece Hall. Maybe this is just my cynical Jets fan brain working, but I'm like that's bad. I mean, to tie it into an early point, you see the schedule that they got in the first 6 weeks? Like that's when you're not going to have Breece Hall is Kansas City, Philly, Dallas, Buffalo, New England. Like you don't have your best running back for a guy who runs the ball all the time and splits carries a lot. That wasn't as encouraging to me, especially because the backup right now, I know they got Israel Abanikanda in the draft, but I don't think they view Israel Abanikanda as a guy. Like if he's getting like over 100 carries or 150 carries his rookie year, something's gone horribly wrong. For as much as I love him as a prospect, I think I had like a 3rd round grade on him. He's there to be the number 3 back ahead of Zonovan Knight and to maybe compete for the kick returner job. The Jets may have to throw him in and get like backup snaps like week 1. He might get 10 carries week 1. That's the position that they're in because of Breece Hall, and not because of Breece Hall like it was his fault, but because of how long it takes for Breece Hall to recover from this injury. So I'm still expecting big things from Breece Hall this season, but the fact that we only might see him week 1 and we're probably not going to see him till week 4, I think is probably like a realistic date. And even then, you got a guy coming off an ACL injury whose game is predicated on speed. There's some red flags going off there for looking at the Jets running back room.
I think the expectation has been that Breece Hall is ready for week 1. I expect him to be on the field week 1. Now, I don't expect him to be 100%. I don't expect him to get 20 carries week 1, but I do think he'll be ready for week 1. I know a player's word isn't always the best, but he's come out and said that he expects to be ready for week 1. I believe it's been reported, like I think Zach Rosenblatt reported that the Jets expect him to be ready for week 1. I don't think he's going to play in the preseason. I think that he'll probably be on the PUP list for most of training camp and even the preseason. But I do think he'll be on the roster week 1. That's everything that we've heard indicates that he's going well in his recovery, which is great because obviously, like you said, everyone recovers from major injuries differently. You know, not everyone can be Adrian Peterson and rush for 2,000 yards 6 months after tearing your ACL. Like that's not everyone can be that, right? But I think with Breece Hall, we're seeing that even though I think it was, it was mid-October or whatever last year that he tore his ACL, the expectation seems to be that he'll be ready for week 1. I think Joe Douglas is just kind of being cautious about it. They don't want to be overly optimistic with their injury diagnosis or, diagnosis, whatever.
Diagnoses.
Sure. Yeah. Because they've been burned with that so many times in the past. So I really, honestly, I don't want the Jets commenting on injuries for the foreseeable future because they have said a lot of things that turn out to just not be true. So I would rather than be overly pessimistic with every update that they give than say, oh yeah, he's going to be there for week 1 and then it's week 5 and he's still on the IR. Right. So at this stage right now, I'm cautiously optimistic that he'll be there for week 1. But like you said, he's not going to get a full workload. Like he's not going to be your bell cow back probably early in the year. At least you wouldn't assume so. So those guys, behind him, Michael Carter, Izzy Abanikanda, Zonovan Knight, they're going to get work. They're going to definitely see their fair share of snaps. I like the Jets running back depth. I don't think there's an obvious, definite like RB2 who I'm very confident can handle the load, but I'm confident in Izzy Abanikanda as a complimentary back. I really hope Michael Carter bounces back because he was genuinely very good as a rookie and just lost a lot like last year, whatever it was. Obviously, him and Zonovan Knight were done no favors by the offensive line later in the year because it was just falling apart by that stage with all the injuries. But Michael Carter is still a very productive back when it comes to like breaking tackles, very physical runner. He's a tough runner. He doesn't go down in first contact a lot, but the explosiveness it wasn't there from him last year.
And that's weird because when he was at North Carolina with him and Javonte Williams, he was like the speed home run hitter guy, and right. Javonte Williams was the power guy.
Yeah, I don't know if it was like some kind of ankle. Like they haven't really revealed that he was dealing with any kind of injury. We haven't heard that, but obviously it's the NFL. Everybody's hurt all the time, right? So maybe he had some kind of foot or ankle problem that was bothering him. We don't know. But I'd love to see him bounce back this year and really claim and hold on to that RB2 role. As much as I love Izzy Abanikanda, and I think it's totally reasonable that he takes over that RB2 role at some point during the year, I'd love to see Michael Carter step up and be like, you know what, this is my job, and I'm not losing it. But we'll see. I as far as like Breece Hall expectations, I don't know if it's reasonable to suggest that he's going to be like a 1,500-yard rusher this year because I don't know how healthy he's going to be. But I think as long as he stays healthy and he doesn't re-injure himself, God forbid, that I think he's going to be your bell cow back sooner rather than later again. I think they'll take it slow with him early in the year, but before long, I think we'll see the Breece Hall of old.
See, I'm just generally a lot more pessimistic on the running back room than I think you are, especially when you hire Nathaniel Hackett. And although he's known primarily as the Aaron Rodgers guy, he's also known as a guy who loves running the ball. It's what he did in Buffalo. That's why he was successful in Jacksonville. And then, you know what? Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, both of them performed pretty well under Nathaniel Hackett, especially Aaron Jones. The problem that I had, because also wasn't Carter, like he wasn't just bad. Didn't I think PFF had him as like the worst grade running back in the league or
maybe.
Close to
PFF
it.
running back grades are weird though. Like Breece Hall was like rated poorly by PFF. It was really weird.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure. I don't want to, that might be false, but I'm pretty sure that was true.
But on top of that though, like I remember
really
that
like,
whole
sorry.
on top of when the whole Jahmyr Gibbs story came out, like obviously that was like a meltdown. Oh my God, Jets almost took a running back. And then I'm thinking about it. Like number one, Jahmyr Gibbs was a wide receiver on like 30% of his snaps at Alabama, so he would have been more like an offensive weapon kind of thing. And then I look at the running back room and your top three. Let's just look at your top three guys, not counting Abanikanda because they didn't have him yet. You got a guy coming off an ACL injury that not everybody comes back from, especially a running back. Like there's Adrian Peterson's, and then there's some guys that just the running back versions of Deion Jones who just lose it and never get it back. You get Michael Carter, who I know that you say like, oh, he could have a bounce back year. I'm a little less inclined to give a running back who was picked in the 4th round that sort of developmental runway because running backs just have such a short shelf life sometimes. Like I'm just not going to keep like how am I going to keep hoping for Michael Carter to break out if he doesn't like start off hot this year? So that's and then Zonovan Knight, who I started off hot, and then the second half of the year, I know the line sucked, but like 1.9 yards a carry. I mean, there are guys whose lines suck that don't average 1.9 yards a carry. So I'm looking at that, I'm like, you know what? I almost understand it, because at that point you would just have a 1-2 punch of Hall and Gibbs that we would have at least been, and then you say, you know what? Next half decade, running back is set. As of right now, they're putting a lot of responsibility on Breece Hall. Now, I think healthy, he's shown he can obviously handle that. I mean, remember that Packers game? He was just, people always talk about the Denver game with the big run. That Packers game where he had that 30-yard touchdown run on a botch play where he was just dodging and evading dudes, like that, you can't teach that. That's just instincts and talent and skill and speed. Like, we've seen what he can be at his best, and if he gets back to his best, Jets are set. But I mean, I think people are, because ACL surgeries are so like advanced now and they're not what they were. Like back in the old, you got an ACL injury, you were done.
Yeah.
You were done. That was the end of your career. It's like Gale Sayer, you're just done. Like, it's not everybody just bounces back like that. It's not like you just go, they go whip you up a new ACL. I'm not a medical professional, as you could tell. Once they whip you up a new ACL, it's not that everybody's magically back. So I hope that Breece Hall recovers well. I think he will. I think fully healthy, even though he misses a couple games, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect maybe close to 1,000 yards, maybe like in that 4.1, 4.2 a carry kind of neighborhood. I think that's reasonable. But I just don't like the fact in general that the Jets put so much responsibility on a guy who's going to be playing basically with one leg healthy for most of the season.
I get that. I get what you're saying. I like you said, I think I'm more optimistic about the entire state of the running back room. I think that Michael Carter is a fine player. I think after his rookie season, a lot of people were like, oh, maybe he could legit be an RB1. I think that was kind of where people saw his projection, maybe as like an RB1/RB1B or whatever in like a rotation. I think after last year, I don't think we're saying the same thing. But I still think he's a fine player and a quality player. And if you have an actually competent offensive line, which for at least half of last year, the Jets just didn't have. Like, they did not have it. And again, a lot of that was due to injuries, and that's the I think that's the biggest reason why the line struggled as much as they did later in the year. Also, poor quarterback play never helps. But I think that was a good portion of the reason for the struggles in the run game was just the offensive line was terrible. Now, obviously, Breece Hall was able to overcome some of that early in the year. Also, they didn't have all the injuries they had earlier in the year because you had Elijah Vera Tucker, and that was huge because once Vera Tucker went down, he went down that same game that Breece Hall went down. So the entire running game basically disappeared, other than like a couple of good games from Zonovan Knight. Once Breece Hall and Elijah Vera Tucker got hurt. So it wasn't just Breece Hall. Obviously, you're talking Vera Tucker. You had no Mekhi Becton the entire year. The tackle position was obliterated. So I'm more confident about the state of the running game because I'm more confident that the offensive line is hopefully not going to be decimated by injuries as well. And I think I'm very cautiously optimistic about Breece Hall's recovery. It just seems like it's gone very well. Everything we've heard says that he's going to be ready for week 1. And normally you won't be saying that unless you're very confident about it. I think it's totally different than someone like, Javonte Williams in Denver, who is, I don't know what the latest on his injury is, but I'm pretty sure it's a lot more serious than Breece Hall. And I don't think he's going to be ready for week 1. So, obviously we're not going to know until he's out there. We're not going to know until Breece Hall steps on the field, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the state of his injury, how well he will play this year, how healthy he'll be, and the state of the running game as a whole.
So no matter what happens with Breece Hall, the Jets are definitely going to try to supplement this roster on both sides of the ball with some undrafted free agents. And they brought in a real smorgasbord of talented guys, including a couple names I'm really stunned didn't get drafted. Obviously, some of the big names include Jason Brownlee from Southern Miss, who was given a ton of guaranteed money. I think Justin said before the show, like the second or third most money that any undrafted free agent got in this cycle. Big possession receiver out of Southern Miss. He's kind of like a Denzel Mims type, maybe a Mims replacement if everything goes well. There's a lot of big names on there for an undrafted class, and don't scoff at these things because you look at your roster. This is how you build out the back half of your roster with these undrafted free agents. One guy that I was honestly stunned went undrafted, especially because even if you're a high recruit, even if you stink, sometimes the league will just be like, all right, let's flip a 6th-round pick on him and let's just see what the hell we got. And no one did this with him, was Trey Dean. And Trey Dean, a safety out of Florida, I believe a former 5-star recruit as a defensive back. Both him and Rashad Torrance, who was his safety partner, I think either of them got drafted. Torrance didn't get drafted, right?
If he didn't, I'm surprised.
I don't think he did. I think I had 5th-round grades on both of them. I don't think either got drafted.
He didn't. He was signed by the Rams, though. But that is surprising if he wasn't drafted.
So he didn't get drafted either. Trey Dean is the more surprising one. Now, I get reasons why his stock fell because he is 200 pounds and he ran a 4.75 40, which is very, 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 very bad for a safety. And also, there were a lot of times where he's dropping back in zone cover and he just kind of freezes. He doesn't know, do I break? Do I stay? Do I go back? Like, there are a lot of like mental miscues that you got to clean up. But that seems like something you could work with. That seems just figuring out how to understand the game, how to read things. That seems like if you're a good coach, you could probably just instill those things in him. Trey Dean is 6'2", 200 pounds. That's a big safety. Strong guy. 25 reps on the bench press for a defensive back at 200 pounds. That is really pumping some iron. 37-inch vertical, 1.6 10-yard split, which I would take for a safety. And I know the 4.75 kind of scared everybody. He plays a little bit faster than a 4.75. Like that was just a bad run. If you tested him again, I'm sure he's in the 4.6 range, which isn't ideal, but for a bigger safety, I don't think anybody would have any problems with that. And again, 5-star recruits, sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes they go to, I know he was a 5-year guy, but he went through a bunch of different coaches and a bunch of different roles, so his thing kept changing. Like sometimes it's just you get the right set of hands on him and miracles happen. So I think Trey Dean's one of those guys where if he just latches on as like kind of like an Ashton Davis replacement, like a special teams guy, I think that eventually he could kind of work himself into some sort of role with the defense proper.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a former top recruit who played 62 career games at Florida. Like that's I know Florida's fallen on some hard times, but that's still a prominent SEC school. Very experienced player, top recruit, who is a much better athlete than, like you said, his combine numbers would indicate. I mean, I just looked it up. He ran a 4.67 at his pro day, which is 0.08 faster than what he did at his combine.
And as Rob says in chat, he had 2 labral tears in his hip when he ran. So.
Exactly. So he definitely, like, his combine numbers were bad, but if he didn't have that bad combine, he'd get drafted. Like, I think we can confidently say that. So definitely, I would say he's probably the most, either him or Brownlee is the most high profile undrafted player that they signed. And he has a legit shot to make the roster. I'm going to talk about someone different, but I will agree with you there.
Real quick, before you move on to the guy, I just had this thought. What if the Jets say, you know what, let's just have you put on a bunch of weight and make you like another Jamie and Sherwood?
They totally could. He's big enough. Like, he's 6'2". He's big enough. He's got good length as well. If he puts on 15 pounds, he could totally play linebacker in this scheme. For sure. Maybe he's your Kwon Alexander replacement. Maybe it's Trey Dean.
Ooh, who knew? Really hitting my pleasure nodes there.
Right. Jesus Christ.
I could have said any other word except pleasure, and it would have been much better than I said that.
This is a PG podcast, Mike. This is a PG podcast.
Jet Press After Dark with Justin Freed.
Welcome back. But yeah, I genuinely do think he has a legit chance to make the roster, especially because, assuming he doesn't move the linebacker, those backup safety spots they're wide open, right? Like, I love Will Parks. I got his jersey. I love that dude, but he's not a lock to make the roster. Ashton Davis is not a lock to make the roster. I know they drafted Jarek Bernard-Converse in the 6th round. He's not a lock to make the roster. Those backup safety spots, they are wide open, and I think Trey Dean has a legit chance to make some noise. The guy that I'm going to focus on, though, and I know Rob says as well, him or Marquise Waters. That's another guy. I love his nickname, Muddy Waters. That's what they call him, Marquise Muddy Waters. He's more of like a downhill box safety type, but I think he's also someone, especially if he makes an impact on special teams, that could push for a roster spot. I believe both him and Trey Dean got, I think it was $100,000 in guarantees. So they both got a good amount of guaranteed money.
They got legs up.
Yeah. And actually, really quick, you mentioned this before. Like, not only did Jason Brownlee get like a lot of guarantees, the Jets, I believe I saw that they gave out the second most guaranteed money to undrafted players this year behind the Kansas City Chiefs. So they're investing a lot of money in these undrafted players. And it wasn't just Brownlee. I'll pull it up really quick. I had it in some tab. Here we go. It was nope. Here it is. Okay. Brownlee had 246,000 in guarantees. And the guy I'm about to talk about had the second most in guarantees. And it was Xavier Gibson, wide receiver out of Stephen F. Austin. He's someone who, again, I also was a little surprised he went undrafted. I know he's undersized. I know he went to a smaller school, but his tape was really good. His production was really good. Also, a former 3-star recruit, too. So it's not like he's a completely unknown prospect. He came to Stephen F. Austin. He originally committed to SMU, which is, that's a legit FBS school. But bad grades, that I think it was academic reasons or something that kind of forced him. I think it was academic. Also, he was like a cornerback too. I believe he was recruited.
He's like 5'9", 160.
He was like a nickel cornerback. Yeah, he was like a nickel corner.
But corner. I thought you said quarterback.
No, well, that would be like high school level at that point.
I'm like, wait a minute.
No, Gibson was a super, super productive player at Stephen F. Austin. He had over 800 yards in all 4 seasons. He had like 2,500 yards total over the last 2 years. He's small. He's 5'9", 189. He wasn't invited to the combine, but he runs a 4.4. He's an electric player out of the slot. Also has experience returning kicks and punts. And I think that's where his potential route to a roster spot could be. If he comes into camp and he shows, because the Jets don't really have a kick returner or a punt returner right now. They're going to be having an open competition for both of those jobs. And if Xavier Gibson comes in and shows that he can be that guy, and he shows out as on special teams as a return man, I think they got to give him a roster spot. And it's totally feasible that he can make the team as maybe that 6th wide receiver if they carry 6. And he could be, I know they brought in Randall Cobb, but he could be another backup slot. I think it's totally feasible that he can make the team specifically because of his work on special teams. I think Xavier Gibson is going to be like this year's Greg Dortch, where it's just an undersized, small slot receiver.
What an amazing compliment, Greg Dortch.
Well, in terms of, first of all, great callback to Greg Dortch, right? What a shout there.
Was he like 5'6", Greg Dortch?
Yeah, Gibson's a little bit bigger. He's like 5'9". But Dortch was like that undersized, speedy slot receiver who, fans kind of fell in love with, also a return man. I think we're going to see that from Gibson. Also, by the way, Greg Dortch, he ended up having a role at the Cardinals. He's actually
had 52 catches last year.
What
the hell?
He has carved out a career, man. He's carved out a career.
Jeez, they were desperate, man.
They had a lot. The Cardinals had a lot of injuries last year in the receiving.
52 catches.
He was a legit fantasy option at points. So like Greg Dortch, that's not a terrible comp. I don't think that's disrespectful at all. But I think Xavier Gibson can totally be that guy. And the fact that the Jets gave him a decent amount of guaranteed money shows me that they think he can make a roster. Same goes for Jason Brownlee, who we don't got to talk about him too much, but you mentioned it before. I totally think he's coming in and he's your direct competition for Denzel Mims. If Jason Brownlee comes in and actually plays well, and I think more importantly, shows that he can play on special teams, I would not be surprised at all if Brownlee beats out Mims for a roster spot, because they're basically occupying that same role. Especially with Mims, he's on the last year of his rookie deal now, right? This is the last year of his rookie contract. Yeah, so they have no real commitment to Mims. There's no reason why they can't move on from him. I would not be surprised at all if either Brownlee or Gibson end up making a team.
And with that, we are going to call curtains on Justin's return to the Jet Press podcast after a well-deserved vacation. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, wherever it may be that you get your podcast. Make sure you find us on YouTube also at the Jet Press. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you guys hit that little bell so you get a little notification on your phone whenever you go live. So, Justin, feel free to take us home now that you're back in the saddle.
Let's see if I remember how to do this. It's been a week. I don't know, man. I don't know if I can
off your rhythm, man. Off your equilibrium.
I don't know, but anyway, thank you all for joining us on the show today. You can follow Mike on Twitter at Mike Luciano. You can follow me on Twitter at Justin T. Freed. Follow Jet Press at the Jet Press. You download the Jet Press podcast wherever you get your podcast, as Mike just said. Also check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, like, hit that notification bell. You guys know what to do at this point. We stream live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, even in the off season. Thank you all for listening to the Jet Press podcast. I've been Justin Freed. That's been Mike Luciano. See you guys next time.
See you folks next week.